Hi, everyone. This is Jessie Littlejohn, the social media producer for Presbyterian Outlook, and I am here with Amy, who is our book review editor. And we are going to just dive into what Amy has been up to, as we have been in the last couple of weeks, trying to get a behind the scenes look of what it is to be a part of the Presbyterian Outlook staff. And Amy is as crucial to our staff as any other member. So, Amy, if you could just sort of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what it is that you do for the Outlook.
You got it. Thanks, Jesse. And hi, everybody. So I'm Amy Pagliarella. I'm coming from here in Chicago, where I have the best job in the world because I basically read a lot of books and then I get to recruit other book lovers to read books and share the best of the most. I don't want to say the best of the best because there are so many great books out there, but the ones that we think are most useful to Outlook readers.
That's awesome. So, when you are doing your job, you said it's the best of the best. So, can you kind of give us a preview of what's to come, just so our listeners and our readers and subscribers are aware? This summer, the Outlook has a books issue coming out, and so I asked Amy if she would sort of give a preview of what's to come and sort of a what's on her nightstand kind of preview. So these are the things that are on Amy's nightstand and what she has for us to look forward to. So Amy, however you want, you can share what's coming.
I've got some great books to share today. Some of these made it into our summer books issue, and some are ones that I've come across since then. But all of these are what I would call great summer reads. And let me start by saying I think summer reading is a really broad category. Some people, summer reading is, you're sitting on the beach and you want a real page turner. And these are all page turners, but I would say they're also pretty thought provoking. And so that's why I chose a couple of new books that didn't quite make it into the summer books issue. And you mentioned the books on my nightstand. So I want to start by sharing this one that is on my nightstand. This is Magic Enough. It is a new book of poetry coming out from Tara Stringfellow. Some of you might remember her from back in 2023. She published Memphis, just a gorgeous writer. And what I love about this book, and the reason I call this terrific nightstand reading is twofold. First, they're poems. And I don't know about you, but by the end of the day, I don't have a lot of capacity left for reading. So I want to read something restorative and meaningful, but I also, the idea of something short that is going to put me in the right mood to go to sleep is perfect. And so Magic Enough is wonderful for that because these poems go down so easy. And then after you've read it and you start to turn the page, you're like, oh, whoa, I got to read that one again. Because there's just such rich content in each and every poem, thought-provoking, timely, beautiful. You're just going to want to read one of these every night for sure. So that's the first book on my nightstand. The second one these days is The Understory. And this one is also coming out very soon. It's by Lori Ferguson Wilbert. What I love about The Understory, it uses the metaphor of a forest and all of the sort of rich organic matter that you're going to find on a forest floor, the soil, the leaves, even the things that are kind of decaying, but that are making something new. And she's sort of in the spirit of a Wendell Berry. She writes about her own experience moving to the Adirondacks during the pandemic, kind of moving back to a place that holds for her a lot of memories, some very painful memories, and kind of restoring, rebuilding, finding a new way to live in the world in this space. And so these beautiful reflections on life and nature, on stepping away from the busyness to find time to be with God. Really beautiful book. And to me, great nighttime reading because you can just read a chapter and just take a deep breath and think about how you want to spend time with God, which is one of my favorite things to do in the summer months.
Yeah.
So those are the books that are on my nightstand. I want to shift gears a little bit and tell you about some of the books that are more on my desk at work, because these books are a little bit more of the activist books. And the first one here is The Work is the Work by Brian Johnson. Now, this one was released just a few weeks ago. I had a chance to go and hear the author read from the book. He happens to live in Chicago. He even gave us a little The Work is the Work cookie that I'm going to enjoy with my tea when we're finished today. But what I love about this one, Brian Johnson is an activist, a community organizer who's worked in the LGBTQ IA plus sphere for his career. And it's just, it's a practical book, but it's also a vulnerable book. He shares the mistakes that he made along the way, the times that he let the work get in the way of relationships with colleagues. And it's a real useful book that you can be kind of reading and nodding along like, oh, I've been in experiences like that when we're all super passionate for the cause. And so it's something that you can do as you're thinking about what would a summer reset look like, or what do I want to do in the fall? This is one of those books that's going to set you up for the way you want to bring yourself into your work and your life when things get busy again in the fall time.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Similar to that is this anti-racism as daily practice. And this made it into our summer books issue. But the reason I decided to highlight it today was actually because we were just yesterday, I was at church. Jesse, you and I know we have the privilege of working with the Outlook editor, Terry McDowell-Ott. We're usually a virtual team, but over the weekend, she was here in Chicago and she was teaching a class in my church. And so we had the chance to get together with other people and to learn from Terry. And one of the themes that kept coming up is that people said, I need to practice what I'm going to do. If I want to be actively anti-racist and I want to be helpful as a white person, because we were a predominantly white crowd, I need to practice what I will do and say the next time somebody says something in my presence that I'm like, ooh, that's racist. I'm not comfortable with that. I don't want to shame this person, but I also want to have a way into a conversation that might be helpful. And so that's exactly what Dr. Jennifer Harvey does in this book, is she shares her own stories, her own examples. She's an educator, she's an activist, she's been working in this space for a while. And so she gives you great ideas for how you might be active and prepared to be helpful as an anti-racist. So this is one of those books I think you would read over the summer, and then come fall, you're going back to church, you come to your book group or you come to your session, wherever you are, and say, oh, I've got this great book for us to read and work with together. Highly recommend that book.
Awesome.
Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about some fiction, because summer to me is a great time to read fiction. But here is what I love about summer reading. In the summer, I'm able to find longer chunks of time to read. I realize not everybody is. I know when I had small children, that didn't always happen. But in the summer, if you're tossing something in your beach bag and you're going to be able to sit in the shade for a couple of hours and read, you can actually dig into something a little bit meaty. And so that's why what I would put in my beach bag this summer is James by Percival Everett. This book has been out for a month or two, so it may be familiar to some of our Outlook readers here. But what it really inspired me to do, that I'm excited about, is to go to my local library and get a copy of Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. And so I read James, and then I read Huckleberry Finn, and now I'm back rereading James again. That's how rich this book is. It's essentially, James is essentially a reimagining of Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And so if you remember that book, I hadn't read it since high school.
Yeah.
which has been a while. And so
Not that
um,
long. And not that long. If you're
that's
listening, not that long.
You're very kind, Jesse. But in James, it takes the character Jim, who is the enslaved man, and one of the controversial parts of Huckleberry Finn is that Mark Twain used the language and the wording of his time. And so Jim is portrayed as a slave, using the language of a slave, not being portrayed as a particularly necessarily full human or particularly intelligent. But then as the book goes, as Huckleberry Finn goes on, you really grow to appreciate just his innate decency and goodness. And the fact that he's putting himself on the line to try to help this kid, Huckleberry Finn. And what Percival Everett does in James is he centers that character,
Mhm.
Jim, as James, in the story, and kind of applies our sort of modern sensibilities, but also is true to Huckleberry Finn. But the parts of the story in Huckleberry Finn where Jim's not in the picture, you don't know what's happening to him. In James, you see everything that's going on in the imagination of Percival Everett. So it's one of those wonderful books that it's historical fiction, but very much speaks to our time and place in a way that if you just wrote a book about our time and place, you wouldn't necessarily get all those nuances. But by doing it in this way, with just wonderful humor and grace and just beautiful, beautiful writing, it really gives this alternative narrative about that character.
Yeah. Did it give you a new appreciation for Huckleberry Finn as you were rereading it?
It did. It did. I mean, in some ways, it made you cringe a little bit when you go back to Huckleberry Finn,
Yeah.
because the character is portrayed as being sort of superstitious and not very bright. But what is really funny about James is this isn't a spoiler. I can tell you this in the very beginning. The book makes it clear that James is playing a part.
Mhm.
He's a full human with a loving family, and he's articulate. He can read. He can do all of these things. But in order to be palatable to the white slave owning people, he has to play this role of
Mhm.
Jim. And so, even though that's not what Mark Twain had in mind, when you go back and read Huckleberry Finn, the whole time I'm thinking, oh, you know, I'm sure all of these sort of secondary and tertiary humans in these stories would have rich interior lives
Yeah.
that the author just didn't care about, because Mark Twain wanted to tell the story of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. And Jim was like an afterthought, but it just reminds you of just the richness of and the full humanity of people.
Absolutely.
Um, so yeah, it gave me a great appreciation for both books and just for humans. I
Yeah,
mean, it made
absolutely.
me curious, which is what great literature does, right? It makes you curious. One of the things great literature can do is to make you curious about the lives of people around you.
Hmm. That's awesome. That's
Yeah,
awesome. What else
yeah.
do you have for us, Amy?
Well, I also wanted to touch on two more things, and one is sort of a category. Um, don't need to tell anybody we're in an election year. There is a lot being written about not just the politics of America, but about the politics of white Christian nationalism. And
Hmm.
so, one of the books that does that very well is Disarming Leviathan. And what I like about it, this is by Caleb Campbell, and it's coming out in July. What I like about it is it kind of takes the point of view of imagine ourselves as kind of mission workers, and we are equipping ourselves to talk with our Christian nationalist neighbors. And so this one is actually reviewed in our summer books issue. So I encourage everyone to read that issue when it comes out in June. You'll hear a little bit more about it. You can decide if this is a book that's for you. But that's what I really appreciated about it was the idea of sort of being generous and curious when we encounter someone. And again, kind of coming in a little bit prepared to have a conversation with someone who might identify as a Christian nationalist.
Mm, very cool.
So I think this is an important category. I will say too, our September issue of the Outlook, we're going to focus on a few different books that will be in a similar vein. Jim Wallace just wrote a book in a similar vein, and that's also going to be in our next issue of the Outlook. So we're really trying to give people a lot of resources to think about how do faith and politics intersect at such an important time.
Awesome. So, can you give us a little bit of insight into one, how you pick the books that you're going to review, and two, if people who are watching say, "I read all the time, and I would love to write a review." We're Presbyterians; that's what we do. So, how do you pick your books? How do you find your reviewers, and how does somebody become a reviewer?
Those are such good questions. And so, first off, yes, it makes me so happy when I go to my inbox and someone is coming to me wanting to write a review. And if they have a book that they're passionate about, absolutely, I love for people to email me. The primary thing is it needs to be current. So I'm looking right now, for example, I'm working on fall 2024 books, some summer 2024 books, but I'm always looking ahead
Mhm.
because, Jesse, that it takes a little while to put together an issue of a magazine, and we want to have that review out when the book is published or shortly thereafter.
Right.
And so what I do is I'm always looking across all the different publishers. There are a number of publishers that focus on primarily religious and spiritual works. I'm looking at those. I'm also looking at the sort of more popular press. I'm looking a little bit at the academic press. We've got a book that we're going to be reviewing shortly from Yale. We've got one from Princeton, because there are people doing incredible research and coming up with exciting ways to spark conversation and dialogue. But when I'm looking at all those presses, I'm really asking myself, what are the books that are going to be the most useful in the kind of national conversations that we will be having around our faith and our life? And so, for example, when Barbara Kingsolver published Demon Copperhead, that's fiction, but I knew that was going to be something that gets at
Mhm.
an important conversation around rural America, something that is really doesn't get a lot of coverage in the popular conversation. So I was looking ahead, knowing we want to make sure that we cover that. And then similarly, when I'm looking at books about the Bible or theology or some of the headier books, I'm looking at who is having a new conversation, or who is coming forward with something that's really going to help someone preparing for Sunday's sermon, something they want to bring to their Bible study, something they want to bring. Oh, I've got a small group and we want to open with devotions. Here's something that I want to bring. I'm looking at all those different kinds of books and trying to bring the most useful ones to Outlook readers.
Awesome. And it's as simple as emailing you and saying, "Hey, may I have this book?"
Yes,
Awesome. And we'll put your email
absolutely.
at the bottom of the screen so everybody has it as well.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. No promises, because I do get a lot of those emails, but I respond to everyone and make sure that I check out those books.
That's awesome. Just a couple more questions for you, Amy, and these are a little bit more about you rather than the job or the work. But one is, what is your favorite book?
Oh, oh
I
my
didn't tell you
goodness.
I was going to ask this question.
That's like asking which is my favorite child or my favorite cat. I don't know that I could pick just one. So I will tell you, I'm going to go kind of old school here. I think that there is the books that we read as children that form us just always have like a permanent space in that bookshelf in our heart. And so for me, I would say Anne of Green Gables. And I'll
Nice.
tell you why. It's because when I was a kid, I really identified as a reader, and that was a part of, how I saw myself and how I presented myself to others. And so one night, my babysitter told me, "Oh, you need to read Anne of Green Gables. You will find Anne to be a real kindred spirit." And she told my mom about this, and my mom said, "Oh my gosh, I have a copy of that book from my aunt. I will find it for Amy." And so when I woke up the next morning, it was on my nightstand, this beautiful old, falling apart hardbound version. And I thought it was magic that it had just appeared on my nightstand. And I don't think I got out of bed until I had finished reading that book. And so every time I needed just something inspiring, I would reread Anne of Green Gables. And it has stood the test of time to this day.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, controversial question because people have mixed feelings about this.
Okay.
Is listening to an audiobook considered reading?
Heck yes.
Okay. That's
Yes.
my opinion too. I'm going to put it out there.
That's a great question. You know what? To me, it's the content that is important. Sometimes, and I had someone review a book who told me that she's dyslexic, and so listening to the book was really helpful for her. There's another book that I enjoyed reading that someone said, "Oh, Meryl Streep did the audiobook, and so it was so much better to listen to Meryl Streep." Personally, I'm a really fast reader. And I
Hmm.
find audiobooks a little slow. So I will usually read it, but I have nothing but respect for people who listen to the audiobook.
Yeah, I am in my car often. We are a one car family, and so I often will put books on, whether kid books or adult books, whatever consider we consider an adult book.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, as I was thinking about it, somebody asked like, "What are you reading these days?" Well, I'm not reading, but I'm listening, and they said, "Well, that's reading," and I was like, "Well, I guess you're right. That is reading." And then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, well, accessibility wise, if you can't see the book, then how are you going to read it? You have to listen to it. So,
Right.
but some people have very different opinions. So I just wanted to get the official
Oh,
on the
no.
record opinion
I
of
want you heard
Amy.
it here. You heard it here first. Hot take from the Presbyterian Outlook. But, I love that you're listening to books in the car, and when you have children, that can be such a wonderful thing to do. Some of my happiest memories actually were reading all of the Harry Potter books out loud to my children.
Yeah.
If they would sit still long enough, I would do it all over again. And so I think hearing a book read to us is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, when my son was born, or before he was born, one of the things that we asked some of our friends to do was record children's books or to record some of their favorite books via voice memos, and then we'll play them for him every once in a while. And we have copies of the physical book so that he can see the pictures and then hear these loved ones reading them to him, even if they're hundreds of miles away. So I
I
recommend
that
doing that for anybody.
And I have given that as a gift to friends when they have a baby. So what a lovely, lovely personal touch.
Yeah. The last question I have for you before we finish up is what is it about this job that makes you come alive, and where do you see God at work the most? I guess that's two questions.
So the easiest answer is to say I feel like a kid in a candy shop because I get like books sent to me all the time. And so I am so spoiled. I love having access to so many great books. I love that publishers just send me books that I haven't asked for because sometimes I encounter something that I wouldn't have chosen. Sometimes I'm super excited when I get a book that hasn't been released yet. And, there's the new Kate Bowler or that new Barbara King solver, and am able to read it. So that to me brings me such joy. But then the other part that I love is that it's also a very relational job. And so I will recruit people who sometimes have never written a book review before. Never written for a magazine. And I work with them to strengthen their writing. And that to me is very satisfying to be able to work with a new writer and explain that, just by by adding some more active verbs and using some different adjectives and just streamlining a little bit, you can create something really beautiful that you're proud of. And so that to me is incredibly rewarding.
That's awesome.
And so where I see God in all of that is that, everything that I read, is uplifting. Even if it's tough, even if it's just, discouraging about white Christian nationalism, it's written by people who are passionate about making a change in the world, passionate about trying to be God's hands and feet as best and as humbly as we can, here in the world. And I have the privilege of trying to help get those messages forward.
That's awesome.
And that to me it's just a privilege and a joy, and I'm grateful to be able to do that.
That's awesome. Amy, thank you so much for spending time with me and talking about what it is that you do and what it is that gives you joy in this. Friends, if you are listening or watching, please make sure that you pick up our June issue of Presbyterian Outlook and check out all of the work that Amy has done with the book content and with the book reviews and all of our book reviewers. Make sure you pick up a copy of all of the books that she mentioned in our recording today. And if you want to check out some more books, which Amy has quite the curated list, go to presoutlook.com, click the little hamburger, and then go down to the culture section, and you'll see all of our book reviews for as long as we've been book reviewing. So please make sure you check it out. Amy puts a lot of hard work into putting these reviews together for you, as well as all of the authors that are writers that submit their submissions. That's a horrible sentence. I apologize. Um, Amy, thank you, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Jesse.